My name's Sarah Barker, and I'm Professional Affairs and Examinations Manager here at the RSS. Welcome to this Professional Statisticians Forum webinar on the RSS Graduate Statistician Mentoring Scheme, how to benefit from participation as a mentor or mentee. So the Professional Statisticians Forum was set up to enable professional statisticians to share professional experiences, discuss professional development, and the meetings are intended primarily for CStat and GradStats members, but all members are welcome to attend, and usually our meetings are virtual. And we have Phil Baxter from the University of Leeds, who's going to speak from a mentor's perspective about his experience of the scheme. And after Paul, we have Apostolos Fakis, who works for Derby Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, and Apostolos has actually participated in the scheme as both a mentee and a mentor. So again, he'll give us some insight into his experience of the scheme, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So let's make a start. So moving on to slide 2. By way of a bit of background, the GradStat mentoring scheme was launched way back in August 2008. A couple of years prior to that, we undertook a survey of all our graduate statisticians, and one of the questions we asked was, would you use a mentoring service if we provided it? And the feedback suggested that there was a need for this. So it's something that the Professional Affairs Committee took forward as an activity over the ensuing couple of years. And we did look at other mentoring schemes offered by other professional bodies, which are offered in various shapes and forms. So we based our scheme on what was being offered elsewhere. And the idea of offering mentoring ties in quite nicely with one of our strategic objectives, which is to develop the skills of the statistical profession. So that underpins the thinking behind the scheme. It's useful for any GradStat to gain an independent perspective from their mentor. It's one of the pieces of feedback that we've had. There's a quote there was an article in the American Statistical Association News magazine back last year, and I'll just read this quote out. There's nothing quite as liberating as finding out that others share your hopes and fears and will discuss their strategies for career development or career change. So I think that will probably ring true with people who have been involved with mentoring in any form. And it was felt as well that setting up a mentoring scheme would be especially valuable to the many statisticians who work by themselves. So there are quite a number of organisations who will only employ one person as a statistician, and it can be possible to feel slightly isolated, and it's useful to have contact with somebody from outside who understands the sort of challenges that you may face. And moving on to the next slide, slide 4. In terms of eligibility for the scheme, it's only open to people who hold graduate statistician status with us, and in order to hold that status, there's an application process that needs to be gone through, and information about the requirements for GradStat can be found on our website, and I've given the address there. Typically, it's a degree in statistics or a subject with substantial stats content is what is required, and applications can be made online via the website, which I've also given the address for on screen. And once somebody's successfully applied for GradStat, then we send details of how to join the mentoring scheme, and people can then sort of get signed up. Moving on to slide 5, So the purpose of the mentoring scheme, the scheme has quite a specific purpose, and the idea is to try and help GradStats get from where they are currently to CStat status, specifically in terms of CPD requirements and opportunities, documenting their professional experience and development and making a strong CStat application. So when people come to apply for CStat, we do ask them to provide information about their continuing professional development activities for the previous 2 years. And sometimes it can be quite challenging to understand those requirements, and it's helpful to get advice from someone who's actually been through that process themselves, is already a CStat, and can help you make sense of what those requirements are, and also the best way to actually document your experience and development, be that using the Society's online system or your own system of record keeping. And I know that many mentors have helped their mentees put together their CStat application and have actually reviewed it for them before they submit it. So I'm sure that must be extremely helpful. So moving on to slide 6, what the scheme doesn't cover, it's not intended as a general careers advice service, certainly not outside the statistical profession. So inevitably, career development will come into a mentoring relationship, but mentors are not careers advisors, so that they're not, that their role isn't to help people determine their sort of next career move. Although they will be interested in what that person's going to do or their professional plan, that's not really what they're there for, and they're also not there to provide technical advice on specific statistical problems that somebody might encounter in their work. That lies outside the scope of the scheme. So moving on to slide 7, I won't read this out, but there are terms of reference. These are the sort of formal terms of reference for the mentoring scheme, and I've lifted those from the guidance notes for the scheme. So just to make clear that the mentoring is entirely voluntary. There's no charge made and no payment made to people acting as mentors. So it's an additional benefit for people who have gained GradStats status with us, and from what I understand, a very useful one, given the small extra subscription that GradStats pay on top of their membership fee. It's a very helpful benefit to have. And just to make it clear as well that all mentors must themselves hold CStat, and this is only awarded to people who've gone through the appropriate application process, and they've been vetted, and their qualifications and experience have been checked, referees taken up, that kind of thing. So as far as possible, the people acting as mentors are providing the best possible service to their mentees. So moving on to the next slide, slide 8, just to explain a little about the process for actually applying for the scheme. There's a very short application form, just one page of A4, where we ask the mentee just to provide some basic details, contact details, a bit about their background, which sector they work in, and the name of their employer. And the reason we ask for this information is firstly to ensure that we can match them with an appropriate mentor, so somebody who works in a similar field. So for example, if you work within academia, then we would want to match you up with a mentor who has some experience within that sector. And we ask for the name and address of the employer, just so we don't accidentally allocate you to a mentor who works in the same organisation as you, because what we generally find is people like to have a mentor who works outside of their organisation, and the idea of this is to get independent input. So once the application form comes in to our office, we check that the person does indeed hold GradStats status with us. And then we check our pool of mentors to see who's got vacancies and to identify a close match. As I've mentioned already, it's usually based on the sector of work. We contact the mentor and provide some very basic details about the mentee and ask if they're willing to take them on. Providing they're happy, we provide contact details to both parties, and the idea is the mentor usually contacts the mentee first, just to introduce themselves. People find that exchanging CVs is quite helpful initially, or if you've got a profile on a web page, something like that, just so you can see one another's background. And the first meeting really, or the first conversation, is usually just to set ground rules and develop a clear understanding on what the goals of the mentee relationship are going to be, what time commitment the mentee and mentor expect to make to this, and how regular the meetings will be. So moving on to slide 10, as I've already mentioned, anybody who's interested in becoming a mentor must themselves be chartered statisticians. When we contact new CStats to inform them of their award, we do invite them to consider becoming a mentor, because we always need new people. It's always helpful to have a bigger pool of mentors so we can match people up closely. It's very helpful if you've got some experience of mentoring or coaching gained from your professional life within your own organisation. I don't think any formal training is necessarily required, but some kind of mentoring or coaching, line management experience, that sort of thing is useful. If you're interested in becoming a mentor, but you're not quite sure whether or not it's for you, or you're concerned about the time commitments, that sort of thing, we can put you in touch with an existing mentor, and you can have a chat with them about what their experience of the scheme has been, how much time they commit, what the benefits have been to them, if that would be helpful. We also advise mentors to check with their employer, if relevant, first, just to make sure that they're happy for them to be involved with the scheme, and there's no conflict. And also, each mentor will agree with the RSS office on how many mentees they're willing to take on, whether or not they're happy to take people from outside of their own sector. Some people are, some people aren't, and we agree that on an individual basis with each of the mentors as they join the scheme. Moving on to slide 11, how does it work? Well, it's down to the individual mentor and mentee, really. I imagine each individual relationship is going to be slightly different, depending on circumstances, depending on where each of the people are located, and it's up to the mentor and the mentee to agree at the beginning how often they're going to meet and key issues they want to discuss. And obviously those things can change over time, but I think it's helpful to set those rules in place at the beginning. And then most meetings, from my understanding, are mainly virtual, so by phone, Skype, email. It's very easy to communicate virtually nowadays. But some people are able to arrange face-to-face meetings. So if they're both going to the same conference, for example, if they both happen to find themselves visiting London at the same time, and they can meet up for a cup of coffee somewhere, something like that. I know some mentors and mentees do that. And going forward, the mentors and mentees often work together on the mentee midterm assessment. So the midterm assessment is a service that we offer to GradStats. We contact them a couple of years down from when they've been awarded GradStat, and invite them to submit details of their experience to date. That's reviewed by a couple of members of our professional affairs committee, and we try and give feedback on how someone's progressing towards CStat, and when they might be in a position to apply. So that's something that a mentor can clearly provide support with, as well as when the time comes, completing an application for chartered status. So moving on to slide 12, I thought it might be interesting for people to know how many people have passed through the scheme since 2008. So to date, we've had 111 mentees and 58 mentors. And just to give you a bit of perspective, we have around 400 or 500 GradStats altogether. So quite a number of people have made use of the scheme. And at the minute, we have around 50 active mentees. So obviously, people come and go from the scheme. And 27 mentees have applied successfully for Chartered Statistician status, and there are several mentees who have subsequently gone on to become mentors themselves. So I'll hand you over now to Dr. Phil Baxter from the University of Leeds. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, I'm Paul Baxter. I'm speaking primarily as a mentor, and my day job's as an associate professor at the University of Leeds, and I'm also the vice president for professional affairs at the Society at the moment. So that might give some context to the comments I'm going to make. So I'll move on to my second slide. So it might be helpful to know a little bit about me. I've had a fairly standard sort of academic career trajectory. I've been at Leeds for nearly 14 years now, coming straight from a PhD to a lecturing position in the School of Maths, and then for the last 8 years or so in the School of Medicine as a biostatistician. So I'll move on to my third slide. So I've had quite a long involvement with the RSS. That's certainly not a requirement of being a mentor, though I find it kind of helpful for context to help mentees. And again, it might help you setting in context some of the comments I'm going to make. So my involvement started at a local level with the RSS local group in Leeds, moving on to some of the more national things in the early days of the Young Statisticians section. Probably one of the key things on there is when I became chartered myself in early 2010, and then latterly more involved with professional affairs and currently vice president. So the only sort of required thing on there in terms of being a mentor is that, yes, I am a chartered statistician. So moving on, I've had 3 mentors, mentees to date. My first was an academic based in London, and that relationship was sort of shortly after I got my own chartered status and lasted about 2 years until the mentee was successfully awarded CStat. I had a second mentee who was based in the Midlands, and that relationship lasted around 4 years. And my third mentee, who's currently with me, is another academic research fellow, again happens to be based in the Midlands and has been with me for about a year. So you'll see that I've had one mentee at the time, and that was a conscious decision by me as to how many people I could sort of advise, fit around my other commitments. They're all academics, and again I think that's important. As a mentor, you need to think, well, what sorts of statisticians work in such a range of backgrounds, where can I usefully give advice? And for me, that meant people with similar backgrounds to my own, biostatistics or related sort of areas. First mentee was based in London, and that worked quite well in that I was able to meet with them face to face, often at St Pancras Station. The other 2 mentees, it's been primarily via phone, and that's worked reasonably well. Not quite as good as face-to-face, but I think better than trying to do things purely by email. So I'll move on to my next slide. So as Sarah mentioned, the RSS centrally will help with setting up the relationship, and the pro forma which you can see there might be a little bit small. The RSS provided me with, and I found that a really helpful starting point for all three of the relationships, sort of agreeing how often are we going to meet, who's going to contact who and when, and cancellations and so on, just so that everyone knows roughly how we're going to operate. So this is an anonymised version from one of my mentees. We've worked pretty similarly for all three, in that we've aimed to meet roughly every 3 months for a telephone call, or where possible face-to-face for 30 minutes up to an hour. And the other things in this agreement around cancellations has not really been a problem, but I think it is good to have these things agreed in advance. So I found that's a good way to start the relationship. Fill out that form, agree how you're going to operate. Then I'll move on to my next slide. So how has the relationship worked? Well, for me, it's always been in sort of 3 phases. A kind of getting to know you phase, and the way I've usually done that is that a mentee has shared a CV describing where they're currently at, and I found it helpful to share quite early a copy of my Chartered Statistician application. It's getting a little old now and things have changed in terms of the process, but it gives a flavour of kind of what's required and what we're both working towards during the relationship. So that's how I've started things. It's worked well for me and my mentees. So I'll move on. So once we've sort of had a few meetings around understanding where we're both at and sort of given some initial advice on any obvious gaps or things to think about, then quite quickly, I'll move on to the next slide. It's been about working towards the midterm assessment that Sarah spoke about. What I'm showing you there is an anonymised version of the midterm assessment from one of my mentees, which I'm showing with permission. One of my other roles in professional affairs, I used to review the midterm assessment, so I've seen quite a lot of these, but what you see here is quite typical of when a mentee has submitted a midterm assessment and has got some feedback back about timescale before they'll be ready for chartered status. And usually the sort of advice that comes back is around thinking more generally, and generally a lot of the advice I've given to my mentees have been about the more general development around their role and broader things that they can get involved with. So remembering that professional development is more than just what's immediately involved with your role. So sort of mid-phase of the relationship for me has been about working towards that midterm assessment, so helping the mentee to fill out the form and fairly reflect what's in their CV, because again I've found mentees often don't take a step back and think about all the broader things they do within a role. And then when the feedback comes back from the RSS, it's about helping the mentee to perhaps understand, decode that feedback and think, well, what can they do to take that into account to move on to the next stage. So that's been sort of the midpoint in the relationships I've had with mentees. So moving on to my next slide, and the sort of last part of the relationship, once a mentee's been through the midterm assessment, has really been about helping them with their chartered application, so getting them to start filling in the paperwork early, reviewing gaps, taking on board the midterm assessment feedback, and that in some cases has taken a while. I think it's good to start early, start with the paperwork, help your mentee to work through that, and in all 2 cases I've been through so far, the conclusion of the relationship has been the successful submission of a CStat application. Moving on to my 9th slide, benefits and challenges as I see it, as having been a mentor. There are some clear benefits. It's nice to be able to give back to the statistical community at large and to feel that you've made a difference to an individual and been able to help them on their journey. There are also some benefits to the mentor in that mentoring is an important skill, certainly in the academic promotions criteria that I'm used to. So you are developing your own skills as well. So that's certainly not my primary reason for being involved, and I doubt many mentors are involved really for that reason. The challenge is, well, it's sort of a generic challenge for everyone in terms of making time to meet and to prepare. I think that's manageable if you have a mentee who's in an area similar to yourself, so you've been through some of these experiences yourself, and so in terms of preparation, maybe for each meeting, I might spend up to an hour reading over CVs, reading over applications for an hour's meeting, but it's been that sort of level of involvement I've typically had. Other thing that can be difficult, of course, is maintaining the relationship at a distance where you're probably not interacting that regularly. But again, I found that occasionally I've had to drop mentees a line and say, so how are things going, and sort of follow things up, but I've always found that it works out okay. The last point on challenges, Sarah talked about the clear focus of the scheme and needing to be clear on what is your remit and what's not your remit. Again, I've not really found that to be a problem, but you could see that there are certain things you wouldn't want to get involved with, relationships with employers, advice outside of this idea of building towards your chartered applications. That's certainly something I've had at the back of my mind, though I've not found it to be a problem. So if I move on to my final slide, thinking about advice to mentors, I think I'd strongly advise to work with mentees who are in a similar sector as yourself, because I think that makes it easier for everyone in terms of you giving advice and understanding the mentee situation. Might not be the same for everyone, but that's what I personally feel. Again, timing and capacity, I've found it better to have one mentee at a time. That fits with my other commitments. And I think you'd have to think carefully, did I really have space for many mentees simultaneously? Perhaps some people would. Good to agree the expectations at the start, and I think the form that the Society provides is really useful for that, for agreeing expectations and how the relationship will operate. I think there are some natural ways to focus the relationship around understanding the applicant, their CV, building towards a midterm assessment and understanding the feedback from that, and then building towards an application. I think that works well. I've always asked mentees to send very brief notes after we've met, just so that we have a record if we're not meeting again for a couple of months, so we know where we were last time we met. And in terms of the actual work of being a mentor, I found most of what I've done has been around the broader perspective. Well, how can the mentee get involved with things inside the profession, maybe through the society, maybe elsewhere, and how can the mentee reflect all of the things that they're involved with, because they're usually very good at reflecting the core of their work, be it the research, teaching if it's an academic role, but the other things they do around that are important for professional development, they might not obviously write down or know how to record. So those are my main pieces of advice for mentors. I'll wrap things up there. Very happy to answer any questions. I wish all prospective mentors and mentees success.
We have had a few questions on the Q&A box, so perhaps I'll quickly go through those before we move on to our next speaker. So Caroline has asked, what is the time frame between applying for GradStat and being accepted? Well, the answer to that really depends on the timing of the next meeting of the Professional Affairs Committee. So the PAC meets 4 to 5 times a year, and they review all applications received. So the longest you really should wait is 2 to 3 months. It very much depends on how quickly we get responses from people's universities, because we do check everybody's qualifications. So I would say typically between 2 to 3 months, but it can take longer. And another question from Caroline, is feedback on midterm assessment provided to mentors as well? Well, not automatically. It's provided in confidence to the GradStat, but if the GradStat has a mentor, then I think we would usually expect them to share the feedback that they've received with their mentor, and that's something that would be covered during their working professionally as a statistician for 2 years, but only recently obtained GradStat due to awareness and other reasons. Do my past 2 years of professional work therefore not count towards my progress to CStat status? We quite likely will be able to count that, providing it's suitable and meets the requirements. The clock doesn't start from the date you obtain GradStat. The clock starts from the date you are awarded your qualifying degree. So I hope that helps. But if you want to contact me directly, Tommy, at the RSS office, then we can look at your particular circumstances and sort that out. So another question from Caroline: Does the RSS provide any assistance with getting mentees universities to confirm their course? I'm guessing you mean getting confirmation from universities of somebody's qualification. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but getting mentees universities to confirm their course. We go directly to the university registrar. If there are issues with gaining confirmation of anybody's qualification, then we will go back to the person and liaise with them directly and try and resolve the issue if there is one. How long does it take to usually find a mentor? From my experience, it may serve mentees to be proactive in finding one rather than waiting. The wait time has gone down recently because we have recruited quite a new number of mentors. So there was a point where we didn't have enough mentors to actually accommodate all of the mentees on the waiting list, but we've taken on about another 15 mentors recently. So we're in a much better position than we were this time last year, for example. So I would usually aim to allocate someone to a mentor certainly within a month or so of them actually applying for the scheme. So another question from Laura: I've been working in academia for the last 5 years, but I have recently just changed roles in the last 2 months to work as a government statistician. I've been trying to keep a record of the experience I've had so far. Could I still benefit from this type of scheme, and will it matter that I've been working in one area for 5 years and recently changed to another area? I would say yes, you could still benefit from this type of scheme, and we would be able to find a mentor who can support you, either somebody who's been working in the area that you've been in for 5 years, or someone who's working in the area that you've recently changed to. I don't see that would be a problem necessarily, and I think you could certainly gain benefit from the scheme. So I hope that helps. We'll have time for more questions later. So now I'm going to hand over to Apostolos Fakis, who works at the Derby Clinical Trial Support Unit, and he's going to speak about his experience as a mentee.
I'd like to present my experience as a mentee of the RSS mentoring scheme, and recently joined the scheme as a mentor, so I will talk about that as well. So starting from my second slide, where I've got a few pictures, I'd like to take you through where I started. And I was born in a city called Volos in Greece. Is the top left picture, where I grew up and graduated from the high school. Mentioning my roots, I think it's really important for people to understand my future career. And my father has been a teacher in mathematics, and my mother was a doctor in renal department. And I think that has influenced my future, decisions and career. And I moved then to the bottom left corner on the picture. It displays the University of Economics and Business in Athens, where I graduated from the Statistics department. And definitely I learned all the basics around statistics. And that led me to really want to know more around stats. And I enrolled to a Master of Medical Statistics at Lancaster University, which is the top right picture. That course definitely gave me all the knowledge and confidence that I needed to apply for a job. And when I finished my master in medical statistics, I applied for a job in Derby Teaching Hospitals. So it is my current job. And it was interim post for 2 years, fixed term to cover a maternity leave. After the first 2 years, my contract was extended for another 2 years. And I've been in this post since 2005. After 3 years being in the post, it's worth mentioning that I was looking for a new challenge, a new inspiration, career progression. So I was looking to apply for jobs in pharmaceutical industry. And I applied for a few jobs. I was invited for interviews from some big pharmaceutical companies and CROs. I was not successful at that point. And that made me realize that I was not probably ready yet and something was missing from my career. I was not very sure how to take it on at that point and where to go next. So, and I think at that point was when I looked for the RSS and the RSS for the grandstand mentoring scheme. So if we move on my next slide, slide 3, I would say that having the opportunity to enroll in that scheme, that gave me really an opportunity to focus my mind, what I want to do, and give me a motivation, where to go next, what would be my next steps in my career, how can I fill in the gaps, and how can I achieve what I want to achieve. So the RSS mentoring scheme that I took was really a good step where I was and the development that I wanted to have in my career. I had very, very good coaching and mentoring by Trevor Lewis. I hope he doesn't mind mentioning his name, which has been very constructive and helped me develop in the direction I wanted. Moving on, my next slide. The mentoring scheme definitely gave me an opportunity to develop further. So from a professional perspective, I attended statistical courses to cover some of my gaps that I had in my knowledge, like multi-level modeling, missing data, and multiple imputations, meta-analysis, and also highlighted to me that I had to extend my knowledge. So I took some courses around data management. I enrolled on the Association of Clinical Data Managers. I undertook training around building a database on electronic data capture system like RAVE. At the same time, I enrolled on a part-time doctorate at a health and social care practice. And I started setting up collaborations and partnerships with accredited clinical trial units. And that insight gave me really good knowledge about good practices that their other units were doing. That helped me to develop our own practices. And also undertook a lot of service improvements. So, for example, a survey of our department to find out about our services, whether they are good or not, and how we can improve them. Undertook a big exercise around research activities that are happening in our department, and did a process map of those activities, how we can improve and change and see the gaps around those services. So through the scheme, I had to go beyond really my job description. I realized that I had to push myself. I had to take really a challenge if I wanted to develop and move my stats knowledge and career. So moving on the next slide, what these activities offer me is really the confidence to progress and also inspiration for getting involved in activities that I hadn't thought that I can undertake or complete. So I was given the role of a senior medical statistician. So I had to line manage another statistician, and that gave me a different perspective, helped me develop even further as a statistician and develop my management and leading skills. I got involved in large multi-center clinical trials, which again, for me to have the chance to get involved in those trials meant that I had to build my confidence. I had to build my statistical knowledge. And through the scheme and having the right direction to develop those skills helped me to undertake those big trials. Acted also as a data manager, so which was beyond maybe my role, but was needed in some times. And because I had the training, I acted as a data manager. I even built a database, a part of it on array for study. I've led also the tendering process for identifying an electronic data capture system, a suitable one for our organization. And at that point, I started also developing the statistics and data team. And all the activities that I was doing, all the knowledge contributed in my continuous professional and personal development. Really helped me with my annual appraisals and helped me to progress my career and have an inspiration really for my next steps. So moving on the next slide, number 6. With all these activities that I undertook, all the knowledge, it came the recognition as well. And that is being and seen as an expert in your field. Internal people like colleagues, other statisticians, data managers, the director of our department, or even the medical director of our trust, to be coming to me for an advice around the areas where I've gained all the expertise. External people as well, researchers, NHR, the National Institute for Health Research, when they're recruiting reviewers, they were very happy for me to offer those services, as well as being reviewer for the Lancet journal, being a statistical advisor for a diabetes journal, and being a vice chair on research ethics committees. All these external really bodies recognizing the expertise and knowledge that I've gained and offering the opportunity for me to extend even further my career. I was able to involve in the decision making, representing the statistics team and data team about big decisions, as well as the Royal Statistical Society recommending me for the Science Council CPD Award, where I received a commendation, and that was really very, very rewarding to know that all the activities that I've been doing and the way that I was keeping my records was acknowledged. Also, I was recommended by RSS to be a council member, and then through the elections to be elected as a member of the RSS Council. I've recently been offered an honorary position as a professor in the University of Nottingham for all that work that I've been offering and all the teaching I've been doing for some of the medical doctors. And recently been upgrading my job description as a head of medical statistics and data management. And also to mention, obviously, that all these activities led to be awarded the Chartered Statistician status. So it's a lot of recognition that is coming together with all these activities, and going through that scheme as a mentee definitely helped me massively to progress in my career. Obviously, the decisions were mine with regards to what to do next, but the advice and the guidance that I had by my mentor, I think, was key for me to develop and to be where I am today. So moving on the future, my next slide, I've decided to take on the role as a mentor, and it offers me really a completely different perspective now, and developing a new set of skills that possibly I wouldn't expect to develop. So developing definitely more my leadership skills, as well as developing my coaching and mentoring skills, which both are helping me to develop my internal statistics and data teams and help my people to develop themselves, as well as make me realize that the way that I was offering advice to my internal team members was not the same probably that I was offering to the mentee that I had on the RSS mentoring scheme. So what I've done recently is I adopted in my everyday conversations with my staff a different approach when I'm asked to give a solution to a problem, or they have a query or a question, instead of just advising or just telling them what to do. I'm using more now the coaching, mentoring approach, which helps me develop, but helps them as well not to be told what to do, but helps them to develop and helps them to go through the problem more themselves. The mentoring scheme also helps me continue professionally. So I have to keep up with what's going on in the community, my knowledge, as well as being able to develop further my team members and be able to create a high performance team. So for example, advice for courses or general knowledge or guidance that I am offering to my mentee, I can offer also to my internal staff. And there are situations where information is coming out of my session with my mentee, which I then realize I haven't fed back to my team members, or I hadn't thought that it could be used in a similar way that I'm using for my mentee. So my role as a mentor, and I have to say that I'm very new on that role, is really inspiring for me at the moment, because I want to develop my leadership skills, I want to develop my people, and it's another good opportunity for me to push myself forward. I think that's it from me, my experience as a mentee and mentor.
So it only leaves me to thank Paul and Apostolos for their excellent talks. Thank you very much to you both.